annual social justice mixer. My name is Annie Ban, and I'm the co-chair of the Civil Rights Committee, along with Mari Bandoma, who's the other co-chair. Yanni Lin and Shelby Nacino are also part of the Civil Rights Committee, helping to plan our events. Please consider becoming an AABA member to support more events like these. This year, our social justice mixer will focus on the impact of ICE transfers during the pandemic and why ICE transfers need to end to protect the health, safety, and welfare of all Californians. So we have two speakers on our panel today. The first is Angela Chan, Policy Director and Senior Staff Attorney managing the Criminal Justice Program at the Asian Law Caucus, the nation's oldest legal and civil rights organization serving the API low-income community. And our second speaker is Assemblymember Rob Bonta, and he'll be joining us shortly. He represents the California State Assembly's 18th District, which includes Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. So I'll start with some questions for Angela, and since we have a smaller group, we can actually answer questions as they come up during the panel. So please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box, and I will read them as we're talking about that specific topic. So let's start first with, Angela, your office and Assemblymember Bonta's office, along with a lot of other organizations, have been urgently calling for a suspension of the state transferring community members from California custody to ICE detention during COVID-19. Can you share what this is and why it's so important to saving lives and protecting public health?
Sure, and thank you, Annie. Thank you to Shelby and also Mari for organizing this event. We appreciate having a platform to share more about this immigrant rights and criminal justice issue. So what is an ICE transfer, just to kind of get that clear, and I'd love to see if there are any questions from folks after I explain it. So that is when someone is in local custody in a jail or in state prison, and they have served their time and they are getting released. Oftentimes it's because they've completed their sentence or they've obtained parole, which for those not familiar is a very rigorous process to obtain parole through the Board of Parole hearing with consent from the governor's office. And it's at that point that California, through our local jails and through our state prison system, then basically does a favor to ICE and says, if this individual is an immigrant, meaning they are undocumented or they're a green card holder, and ICE is interested in them, rather than allow them to be released in the community as what they would do with anyone who's not an immigrant. You've served your time, you're allowed to return home and continue with your reentry plan. Instead, they say, well, you're an immigrant. So we're going to do ICE a favor, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We're going to do them a favor, and we're going to let them know that we're going to release you. We're going to give them special security clearances to enter the prison or the jail, to allow them to come in and take you and transport you to an immigration detention facility, often hours away, oftentimes in very rural areas, far away from the individual's family or community, and they will then take it from there. And ICE will oftentimes then subject immigrants in their custody to pressuring them to waive their rights for due process in immigration proceedings and pressure them to, voluntarily, quote unquote, deport themselves. And right now in California, that continues even with the spread of COVID, both in our prison system and in our immigration detention facilities. And what we do know from this pandemic and from just recent events of what's happened is that transfers between facilities, especially these large congregate settings, right, of both our state prison and our immigration system, results in outbreaks of COVID, very serious outbreaks that have led to a number of deaths. So hopefully that will give people a sense on this call, on this Zoom, what an ICE transfer is and why we're concerned about it.
Thank you, Angela. And I just wanted to point out Assemblymember Rob Bonta, we're so glad you're able to join us. We were just speaking about why it's so urgent to call for the suspension of ICE transfers, and Angela had a great explanation about what ICE transfers are. Is there anything that you would want to add that can talk about why it's so important to saving lives and protecting public health.
Absolutely. Hi, Angela. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm running behind. My technical challenges got the best of me for a few minutes, but figured out an end run. And glad I'm here. And thank you all for participating. Hope everybody's healthy, safe, and well during these very challenging times. And with respect to ICE transfers from state prisons to ICE, these are voluntary acts by the state of California that the state of California needs to own, and they're self-inflicted wounds and self-inflicted harm on vulnerable populations that need not suffer that harm. It literally costs life and health unnecessarily. We don't need to transfer individuals from CDCR to ICE. When we say ICE, let's be clear about what we're talking about. These are private, for-profit, predatory, corporate-run facilities that are run to make a profit for their shareholders. They elevate profit over people. They cut corners wherever they can, corners that lead to less human dignity, less public health, less safety, worse conditions, in order to maximize their profit. So painting a picture of where we're sending these individuals is really important. And but for an individual's immigration status, the same person being released from CDCR, if they if they are documented, will be sent home to their community, to their family, to people that love them, to jobs and the opportunity to rebuild their lives. Because the individual is the same in every other way except for their immigration status being undocumented, they are sent to, in a van, taken sometimes out of state, away from their family, torn apart from their family, from their partner, from their children, from their livelihood, where they wither away for years in these for-profit, private-run facilities where their health is at risk, where they're in a congregate setting unnecessarily, where now more than ever, the risk is heightened because of COVID-19. And it's not just the risk of these individuals. I think as fellow human beings who share the circle of community and believe in the livelihood and the well-being of all human beings, we should care. But if you don't, you should care about the staff inside these facilities who are exposed, how they go home to the communities and can spread COVID. We need to be making science-based, data-based, evidence-based decisions to protect our public health. And this is not a prudent one right now. And I don't believe it was prudent before COVID-19, but it's even less prudent and less in the interest of public health and public safety now. So I think it's really important to me that we all be clear that it's not CDCR following some sort of higher order from the federal government. They don't need to do this. They could release these individuals. They don't have to cooperate. And if ICE wants to retain the authority that they have and seek out those individuals at their homes or in the community, they may. But I don't believe that the state government should be willingly and voluntarily participating in the pain and anguish and risk to public health and risk to life that these ICE transfers create.
Yeah, and then do we know what some of these stats and numbers are of the COVID cases or from the transfers?
Yeah, some updated stats I can share. So to give you one sense, in San Quentin, which is the prison closest to us in the Bay Area, over just in Marin County, 2,237 people out of 3,126 people incarcerated. That's 71% of the population in San Quentin State Prison that contracted COVID. Gives you a sense of how awful and fast these outbreaks are. And that was the result of a transfer between two different state prison facilities, one where there was an outbreak and they transferred a couple dozen people over to this facility. And that's how that outbreak happened. And then statewide, 12,379 people in our state prison system out of about 100 to 120,000 people have contracted COVID. So certainly there's an outbreak widespread in our state prison system, and that has resulted thus far in 60 COVID-related deaths. And that number increases every day. So these numbers are staggering. And then when you look over at the immigration detention system, about 1 in 6 people in our immigration detention system have tested positive for COVID, about 5,810 cases as of today. So our concern is you're moving people, transferring people unnecessarily, as the Assemblymember said, from one tinderbox of COVID to another, both of which had horrible conditions even prior to COVID, but now is extremely exacerbated by the spread of this virus in these congregate settings.
Right. I mean, these numbers are very shocking and scary to think about. And California prisons and jails are still transferring community members. And how does that put all of us at risk of COVID-19?
Sure.
Go ahead, Angela, you want to go?
Oh, no, please go for it. I love being on panels with you, by the way.
Likewise. I just let you talk and I nod. That's usually my role on panels with you. I think it goes, just a direct question or answer to your question is that it kind of goes to what I was trying to get at with respect to, one tinderbox of COVID, folks being sent from one to the next, and then that tinderbox blowing up in terms of creating a public health risk to the entire community. When you have congregate settings, as you have in these detention facilities where people literally, the detainees the Californians in detention have no control over, where they are, who they interact with, who they sit with or sleep with, the rooms that they share, the bathrooms that they use, and they can't physically distance. They can't, shelter in place safely. They can't have PPE. They're often not provided with PPE to stay safe. So they're put at undue risk and they can't control it. And so that we really have to own the responsibility of who makes the decisions, that lead to the health outcomes and life outcomes for the individuals in custody. And then there's staff as well that can't always control who they interact with and when, who are exposed in these congregate settings. And then the staff are coming in and out of the facility, going into the facility, potentially being exposed, going out to the community, to their families, to their loved ones, maybe to folks who are in some of the vulnerable categories, maybe with an underlying ailment, or who are in the vulnerable age category. And it puts the whole community at risk in and around where the facilities are. And then, people travel and people move, and they could be moving COVID-19 with them. So it's, you're right, the data is staggering in terms of the spread. The spread that led to the biggest outbreak in the CDCR in the correctional system at San Quentin was self-made, self-inflicted, a wound we inflicted upon ourselves in California by transferring unnecessarily folks who weren't safe to transfer, and created the spread and put more lives at risk. So interfacility transfers were terminated after that for good reason. But the same rationale that led to the ending of interfacility transfers within CDCR should apply to the transfer of individuals from CDCR to ICE facilities. It's the exact same idea, that you're moving folks who have high risk of exposure or have been exposed into other congregate facilities where more exposure and more spread of the virus could occur. So I think, when you say the data is just so grave and so compelling, I agree. And it should be enough data to lead to different actions on the part of the state of California.
Angela, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's exactly our concern, and we have been really sounding the alarm bells for the governor's office, for CDCR, and for the 58 sheriffs that run the local jail system throughout California about this since the start of the pandemic, and even prior, because ICE transfers has been an issue for quite some time. But we're just right now, I think, very concerned, very frustrated because the governor's office hasn't taken action yet to stop these transfers, and they're still occurring on a regular basis. And so from January until May, we obtained information through Assemblymember Bonta's office advocating for that information, and we found that 575 people were transferred from CDCR to ICE just in the first 5 months of the pandemic, and those transfers, about 115 or so people per month, and that's continuing to this day. We just recently had 2 clients, someone named Patricia Waller, who's a domestic violence survivor from San Diego and Monterey County, who was transferred to ICE, and she was sent actually out of state to a facility in Colorado where she remains to this day, because we're not clear about why, but it appears that they're transferring a lot of people not only to ICE detention facilities in California, but now also outside of California. We have a second client. His name is Tian Pham. He's a Southeast Asian refugee, and he was also transferred by CDCR to ICE detention, and both of them served their time, both earned release. And so we're just extremely concerned with what's happening, because it seems like there's just total disregard for human life with what's happening there now.
Wow. Speaking of those specific individuals, I think the Asian Law Caucus has worked to specifically stop the ICE transfer of a Cambodian refugee, Mr. Shanton Bun. Can you tell us more about Mr. Bun and what happened in his case?
Yeah, I wanted to lift up his case because I think Shanton Bun's case is really emblematic of a lot of the Southeast Asian refugee client stories that we have. Community members who were born in refugee camps in the 1970s, 1980s, survived horrible conditions, including genocide in Cambodia by the Khmer Rouge, who then came to this country because of really U.S. involvement in Southeast Asia, and then were resettled in areas that were criminalized, right? Areas that were predominantly Black, that was under-resourced and overly criminalized. So that the community, the Southeast Asian refugee story, really intersects with the Black community stories. And for Mr. Bun, he resettled his family in Texas, then eventually settled in Los Angeles. He experienced bullying in school due to his limited English proficiency. His family struggled with poverty, with trauma from genocide in Cambodia. And as a teenager, he got involved in a robbery. At age 18, and keep in mind that this is in the 80s and 90s, where California was undergoing the largest prison boom in history, they sentenced him to over 50 years in state prison at age 18 for a robbery. And he served over 2 decades in state prison and was only recently allowed to be released through a very rigorous parole process. That was a part of a series of reforms where California recognized that our addiction to incarceration has gotten us nowhere and actually is harmful to communities of color rather than helpful in any way. It absolutely does not make us safer. And he was finally able to earn release. But however, rather than getting released, the fear and what he was being told is that he was going to be transferred to ICE because he was a green card holder, and due to the criminal conviction and that intersecting with the 1996 immigration laws that take away people's green cards for a whole wide realm of criminal offenses, he was facing a transfer to ICE. The community rallied around him with the support of Assemblymember Bonta, Senator Wiener, also Assemblymember David Chu, and were able to get a lot of attention on his case. Last minute, we were very surprised. He was not transferred to ICE. Actually was called from the bus station around San Quentin and said, hey, come pick me up. And it turned out he was actually positive for COVID. Like many other people who are incarcerated, he has underlying medical conditions. People often have medical conditions that are further exasperated by the horrible existing conditions in CDCR. So he did contract COVID. He fought COVID for quite some time after his release, but the community really came together and kept him and supported him. He was offered sanctuary in a faith-based space, and now he's finally got a chance to see his mom. Imagine seeing your mother over 2 decades later. So there's a short video of him on Twitter just saying hello to his mother again, having his family around, and that's exactly why we do this work. It's exactly why we are so focused on stopping these transfers, because these are community members that are our neighbors, our friends, our family, who deserve a chance to be safely at home with their family rather than in these detention conditions run by, like Assemblymember Bonta said, private corporations that are really about profit and not about humanity.
And you were mentioning another case that just happened last week. Did you want to talk about that?
Yes. So we've had two successes in stopping ICE transfers. Chantham Bun is one of them. The other success is her name is Nayeli, and Nayeli is 26 years old. She was incarcerated for 6 years. And she finally earned release from the state prison facility in Chino. And she was set to be transferred to ICE. She would be deported back to Mexico, a country she left as a child with her mother, a country where she doesn't have any family or support networks. A lot of us came together, Asian Prisoner Support Committee, Immigrant Legal Resource Center, American Friends Service Committee in San Diego. A lot of groups came together and fought hard for her not to be transferred to ICE, and luckily she wasn't transferred. She was released last Friday, is now reunited with her mother. So those are two really positive cases that we're holding on to. But they're, unfortunately, at the same time, many, many more people are being transferred to ICE at this, right now and this time.
Yeah. Are there any takeaways from their two specific cases that could help future transfer cases?
Yeah, I think what we're doing is we're just highlighting story after story for the governor's office and making it very real for them, the people who are impacted. And so I think that's, what we're learning is that it's important to, if folks are comfortable, to share their story, for their families to speak out and to really make really clear what the consequences are when California continues to funnel people into immigration detention. So that's, what we're learning. We're fighting both a fight for policy change at a systemic level with Assemblymember Bonta helping to lead that effort. And we're also fighting case by case, because those are both urgent needs at this very moment. And maybe one more thing I'd like to note kind of about why we're so focused on this is that the way ICE beds are being filled, especially right now, is mainly through these transfers. So about 66% of the people in immigration custody in California, they're there because of these local jail and state prison transfers. So California is playing a major key role in basically filling our detention beds. And so that's why we want to really hone in on that pathway.
Got it. And the Asian Law Caucus and Assemblymember Bonta's office has been urging the governor's office. You had a press conference and you've been sharing stories and you've been delivered a letter to the governor's office. Since then, what has been the governor's response? And either, Assemblymember Bonta or Angela, you can answer.
Do you mind, Angela, if I start? Thanks. Let me just first say, I think the pressure that is being put on both by folks inside the Capitol, the legislature, legislators, over 50 legislators signed on to the letter asking for the end of direct transfers, combined with our allies, certainly including and led by Angela and Asian Law Caucus. Like that sort of movement building inside the Capitol and outside, and coming together as a coalition to raise up these issues is so important. To talk about the data, the stats that you, Annie, were so moved by, like they speak for themselves. If you care about evidence and data to drive policy, which we do, there's a very compelling case. Also the personalization, the telling of stories of impacted individuals, who they are, what they've done, how their lives have changed, what they face if they go to these facilities run by ICE and potentially are deported. The families being torn apart, how they've rehabilitated and turned their lives around, how they're making affirmative, positive good in their communities. Like, we got to tell those stories. And so there's a personal component and there's a policy component. And we've been sharing that, and I think we need to continue to share, because I think we're right. And I think sometimes the policy, there's a lag between those asking for change and when the change comes, but it's the fight that matters and the push together that's so important. And we had some successes, as Angela has shared. I like to think that has a lot to do with the work that we've done, raising the issue, making it more public, putting pressure on the administration to know that there's consequences in terms of public perception if they continue to make these transfers. But we haven't seen the full-on policy change that we want. We've sent the letter, we talked to the governor's team, his policy leads that are on this issue, and they have not committed to the change, and they haven't been specific as to why. They are very generous with their time in terms of hearing our case, hearing the reasons why I and the coalition I'm fortunate and privileged to be a part of believe we should make the change, but they haven't made it yet. And so I like to think that they're listening, that they're continuing to consider and deliberate. And maybe Mr. Buns' case and Nayeli's case are good examples of what the future holds, but we need a strong policy-wide commitment. And the work of Senator Wiener has been instrumental. He grilled the head of CDCR about how this is voluntary and how it need not happen, and that it's happening. These transfers are happening because we've decided as a state that we're going to do it, or at least as CDCR that we're going to do it. And he really put a fine point on that. He was my former colleague at the San Francisco City Attorney's Office, so he showed his cross-examination skills in that moment. And that's the kind of pressure we need to put on them. It's not antagonistic, but it's putting the facts out there and letting them speak for themselves, putting the stories out there and letting them speak for themselves, and putting our values out there and saying, are these actions consistent with our values? We respectfully think not, and we think we should change. So we don't have the commitment that we wish at this point, but I don't believe that not now means never. I think we will get it if we keep fighting.
Yeah, to add to that, the governor held one of his daily press conferences last week, and he was asked by a reporter about this call from, they call it immigrant rights advocates, asking him to stop transfers. And his response was just so unsatisfactory. He said that he's continuing transfers these last 18 to 19 months of his administration because it's what's historically been done. That was his answer. And of course, the pushback is lots of things that are horrible have historically been done that have harmed immigrants, that have harmed people of color. It doesn't mean that you should continue it, and especially in this time where we're dealing with so much and inequality and racial injustice has become so stark that it's hard to deny that for him, as the governor of California, a state that leads on really everything, he should be bold, right? He should take action and not resort back to that's the way things have been done. I expect better from him. I'm hoping for better, and it's our job to push him.
And if I might add,
Go ahead.
Okay, if I might add, there's always multiple pathways to an outcome. Right now, definitely in a state of emergency with the COVID-19 pandemic, executive authority is enhanced. The governor can do more in the interest of public health and public safety. I think ending transfers would definitely be consistent with that executive authority, but it's not the only pathway. There's also a legislative pathway. As Angela well knows, we've been working on the Vision Act to help end direct transfers for those who were convicted as young people and then finish their sentences as adults. There's also a legislative pathway. We could do more, build on what the Vision Act is, or reintroduce the Vision Act and have a legislative pathway. And honestly, I think for some people, just lingering as a backdrop and context is SB 54, the California Values Act, in which this issue was taken up. The issue of how much the state of California cooperates with ICE, including direct transfers at CDCR. And the final outcome for the California Values Act was that it essentially wouldn't impact CDCR's direct transfers. They wouldn't be prohibited. They could not do it voluntarily, or they could do it voluntarily, but they weren't prohibited. So some folks kind of point to that and say that was the quote unquote deal. But that was a final outcome on a bill among the players at that time, in that moment in the history of California. Now we're in a different moment with different players and values that are being uplifted in a different way. And so it's more than appropriate to push for more, certainly in a public health pandemic context where lives and health are at stake.
Right, and so you mentioned the Vision Act as as a legislative pathway. What are some more like upcoming plans using different pathways to continue this effort that we should kind of be on the lookout for?
So we do have an outstanding request to the governor's office through letters that were delivered by Assemblymember Bonta, asking him to issue an executive order that he could issue now to stop these ICE transfers. And so that's what's pending right now. We certainly are strongly considering moving the Vision Act again very soon, next legislative cycle. But we also can't wait, right? He could take executive action now. We could move a legislation also next year. And so, you know, to get a permanent fix. And so certainly we want to push both of those. He also could do something quieter. He could, as the overseer of CDCR, who appoints the secretary of CDCR, who recently appointed a new secretary, he could just order the secretary to stop transfers administratively to stop that. And so there's a lot he could do. It's about political will, right? And him feeling that pressure and also just seeing starkly why this is urgent and needed right now to save people's lives. And so those are the different pathways.
And I'll also add that I have a bill, AB 3228, that's on the governor's desk now. It doesn't end direct transfers, but it does provide more accountability and oversight at the for-profit private detention centers and prisons while they continue to exist in California. And they're all being phased out based on my AB 32, which ends the use of for-profit private prisons, but couldn't interfere with existing contracts that existed at the time the bill was implemented. So it would basically, it requires that the for-profit private companies that contract with ICE fulfill all the components of their contract. And that on paper, there are requirements for looking out for public health, for looking out for dignity and humanity of those who are detained. It says it on paper, but they are not enforced and they are not practiced in real life. So it allows for a private right of action with the opportunity to recover attorney's fees for private attorneys to sue on behalf of impacted individuals whose health or safety was put at risk while inside these facilities. That will put pressure on the for-profit private facilities, but we don't want to have, the answer isn't to say, okay, create healthier conditions in the for-profit private facilities, and then that makes us all okay. It doesn't. Before COVID, and before the additional abuses that have occurred, it was still wrong to transfer these folks. They're being torn apart from their families. They're being potentially prepared for deportation to a country they don't even know. Being torn apart from their communities, and we don't need to be doing that. That is not our role. That's ICE's role if they wish to carry it out. That's part of the division of governmental powers and federal authority. But it is clear based on the case law that the federal government cannot conscript or commandeer the state of California to do their job for them. So we shouldn't be doing it for them. And we are, as Angela says, the biggest source of detentions and Californians in detention are because they've been transferred directly from our own facilities.
Right. We actually have a question from participants. The question is, how have advocates and the legislature adapted their efforts on behalf of incarcerated folks in light of the California wildfires? How has CDCR responded?
Yeah, we do have clients who are incarcerated and who are firefighters. And what we're highlighting through social media also is their stories and how, despite really risking their lives for California and to fight the wildfires, they're still facing transfer to ICE. I mean, it's really absurd. What do you have to do to be able to prevent your own transfer and to be valued, right, by California? So that we're lifting up those stories and publishing op-eds. Bonta published an op-ed had about a month ago that really highlighted the impact of ICE transfers on our communities. And so we're doing that. And we're also uplifting the fact that for those who are incarcerated right now, most of these facilities are in areas where there are fires and where they're drawing very close and where the air is, I mean, awful, just absolutely hazardous. And they're dealing with heat, they're extreme heat, they're dealing with awful air quality, and they're dealing with COVID, right? And so we are partnering with criminal justice advocates, asking also for individuals to be released from CDCR, right? In order for an ICE transfer to kick in, person has to be released. And so we also are concerned that we want to make sure that people do get released from these facilities, that we depopulate these facilities for their health and safety and the surrounding safety of the community due to, you know, the spread of these wildfires and of COVID.
And one other step that we took in the legislature related to that was we put on the governor's desk a bill that I was honored to co-author with the lead author, Assemblymember Eloise Gomez-Reyes, and the governor signed it last week, a bill that allows incarcerated Californians who served on California wildland fire crews to help expunge their convictions and be eligible to serve on similar firefighting crews upon reentry. So that was a prohibition in a bar that had occurred. I think a lot of people felt just in their gut viscerally that it was wrong that when incarcerated, someone could fight on a wildfire crew, but once they re-entered the community, that was prohibited and not allowed because of their criminal conviction status. And so we've created a pathway so that more folks who fought wildfires while in prison can also do so when they're re-entering the community.
We have another question, and this one goes back to the transfers. It says, many of us know that San Francisco and other cities are sanctuary cities. Can sanctuary cities or sanctuary laws do more to help stop transfers to ICE? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so San Francisco Sanctuary Ordinance is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, sanctuary ordinance in the country, started in the late 1980s. And what it says is that we can't use our local resources and our local personnel to work with ICE, to assist ICE, to be, you know, a funnel for ICE as California, but California is, you know, doing just the opposite of. And so that's San Francisco Sanctuary Ordinance. However, it's not perfect. I myself have worked on it and have passed 3 different ordinances to further strengthen it and also to respond to ICE's ever-evolving policies, right? They're always targeting San Francisco because it is really a beacon in terms of sanctuary and a model for the rest of the country. And so we've updated the sanctuary ordinance as a result. But there continues to be issues. The latest issue we're dealing with is that San Francisco Police Department, SFPD, they have been sending cases of Honduran youth who are alleged to have engaged in drug sales and sending them to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the U.S. Attorney then to prosecute federally. These are small drug offenses. And that way the U.S. Attorney can then turn them over to ICE when they're done. So, you know, there are many ways that ICE keeps trying to work around the sanctuary ordinance. And as a result, you know, we need to be nimble and we need to be responsive, right, to try to keep updating and strengthening our sanctuary ordinance. The local coalition that we helped to found and is very active, Free SF, is engaged in that effort.
Thank you, Angela. And as AABA members, where many of us are API attorneys, how can we help or get more involved with these efforts?
Well, Assemblymember Bonta mentioned SB 54, the California Values Act. At the same time as we're trying to strengthen protections for immigrants in our state prison system, or actually create protections in the first place, we also are implementing SB 54. Right? We're making sure that those who should not be transferred to ICE or prohibited from being transferred to ICE under the state sanctuary law that tons of people fought very hard for, including ourselves and Assemblymember Bonta, that sheriffs comply with that. And where sheriffs do not comply with it, where they are turning someone over to ICE, if they know under state law they're not allowed to turn over to ICE, we need to hold them accountable through litigation. And so we do have a number of active litigation matters, including one that's targeted at the Sacramento sheriff who's who has just an awful track record, Sheriff Jones, on immigrant rights issues, and who has really been a mouthpiece for anti-immigrant organizations, even outside of California. So we're actively looking for a pro bono law firm to partner with us to litigate these types of cases against sheriffs who are knowingly and willfully violating immigrant rights protections under our state sanctuary law. And if anyone's interested, I'll just throw my email in the chat box. If you could let me know, because we are really at this moment looking for those law firms, and we have filing deadlines, so we'd love to get connected.
Wow,
And
that would be
maybe I'll
like,
just add, sorry, Annie.
I was just saying that's a very direct way of being able to help. Go ahead, Assemblymember.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just re-refer to AB 3228 if it passes. Again, it's a private right of action. There's no role in it for the AG or the city attorneys or district attorneys. It's for individual attorneys to represent clients who've been impacted and to sue with obviously all the potential recovery for damages based on a tort theory, the for-profit private operators of these detention centers, and then to recover attorney's fees. And I hope that folks that believe that individuals are being wronged, and when they see that these for-profit private companies are acting outside the bounds of their contract, that they are held accountable and they are taken to court to have justice be done. And also, on policy, I think super important to build off the California Values Act and really work towards the complete end to direct transfers for people who are convicted for sure when they were youth and are still in prison and being released when they're adults, but for all people. It's not something we have to do. It's wrong. And our API attorney community can really have an important role, because there's a lot of API members who are impacted, who came from, as refugees or immigrants to this nation, who dealt with trauma and are dealing with intergenerational trauma, who made mistakes when they were young and rebuilt their lives, and should not be sent to the pain and anguish of these detention centers, and should not be sent to a country they may not even know. So I think a real role for our community to come together and fight for those impacted individuals.
Great, and we can also send out Angela's email information afterwards. And so right now we do have some more time for questions. If anyone has a question, they can either ask it in the chat box, or they could even show up on the video and ask any questions. Right, let me see.
And if you don't have a question, I'm just curious if anything has resonated with you or connected with you in what we've talked about. If this is any personal connections, or if you've worked and advocated of any of these types of issues at this intersection of criminal justice and immigration. I know a lot of AABA people are very active on social justice and criminal justice issues.
Here we go. Let's see, I have a question. For those of us who are law students, what are some of the ways to get involved in this sort of work as we think about our legal careers? Yeah, great question. So at the Asian Law Caucus, we definitely have law clerks that are amazing, that I still stay in touch with after many, many years, who go on then to be really leaders in the immigrant rights field. So strongly encourage folks to think about volunteering with the Asian Law Caucus and with any of our partner organizations. Could certainly use your legal research skills. For example, if we're moving the Vision Act next year, there's a lot of legal research that goes behind preparing for that. So I would encourage that. We also hold actions, even now under COVID, we find ways to
organize in-person, socially distant, mask-on rallies. Assemblymember Bonta and myself have been in front of San Quentin State Prison calling attention to the COVID outbreak there, and have had COVID-safe rallies there. So we also encourage folks to follow the Asian Law Caucus Twitter handle and follow our Facebook, where we post in-person and also virtual actions on a wide variety of immigrant rights issues, of course, including this ICE transfer issue.
Yeah, and I'll also add there might be opportunities to push for pardons for individuals, and when they get pardoned, it removes the risk of being deported. And so that's been very helpful for a number of API and other community members who have earned their pardon by rebuilding their lives and being rehabilitated and doing good work in the community. And so seeking that and working, my office has been involved, the API Legislative Caucus has been very involved with that, and also working on individual cases like Mr. Buns, where we know there's an imminent scheduled release from CDCR, and then we really raise the volume around release him to the community, release him to his family, release him home. Don't release him to ICE and to their for-profit private corporate contractors. So, being as a law student, being part of something big, like a big policy change, like the Vision Act or ending direct transfers, can be super exciting, but also being part of something that's big in one person's life and is life-changing and transformative can be very inspiring, and is definitely something where you can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And we had another question. Is there anything we can do to directly support incarcerated folks right now that are at risk of transfer to ICE? I know we spoke about. Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, thank you for that question. If you check out the Asian Law Caucus Twitter handle, we do have several individual campaigns that are being posted on there, including Nayeli, who was just released last Friday, and who we're raising funding for, just so she can get back on her feet. And so I think so far we've raised maybe, I think it's like $1,800. So we could certainly use more donations. And then people need things just like food delivery. When Bun was released from San Quentin, we didn't expect it. It was the first ICE transfer we ever stopped. And so we the community quickly came together and just did a meal delivery service, right? I just, went on Grubhub and sent him some food, and I signed up for a meal delivery. So anyone can do that. And, directly impacted folks feel so supported and so cared for when that's done.
Great. Angela or Assemblymember Bonta, is there anything else you would all like to add? All right. I think
just an appreciation that you organized this event, and I'm hoping it's the start of many conversations with AABA folks about how we can move this. I mean, we're persistent. We're going to fight as hard as we can, and we really want to bring our community members home. So would love to keep partnering with AABA and any interested members in making that happen.
Yeah, and I just want to express my appreciation as well to Annie, to AABA for shedding light on this issue. This isn't an issue that everyone is focused on. It's an issue where people, when they learn about it, I think are really moved and compelled to act and see the wrong that needs to be righted. And, this is the prison to deportation pipeline, and we need to disrupt it. We can change it. We're involved in a way that's voluntarily that we ought not and need not be involved as a state. And we need policy change, and there's individuals whose lives can be impacted for the very good, or if the change is created, or for not so good if some of the momentum and the inertia of the past is carried forward. We need to make intentional change to do better and to be fairer and to be more humane and compassionate.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Rob Bonta and Angela, for sharing the important need to end ICE transfers. And if participants would like to know more about the issues, you can follow the social media accounts of Assemblymember Bonta and the Asian Law Caucus, and we will email out Angela's information if you're interested in the pro bono work to help with ending ICE transfers. Thank you to everyone who joined our social justice mixer panel this year. And so we'll hope we'll see everyone for the next event.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks,
Take
AABA.
care.
Appreciate all of you. Stay
Thank
healthy
you,
and safe.
Assemblymember.